Hello and welcome. I'm Relinda Thomas and I'm here to help you with core assessment. We're about to work through the core curriculum assessment reporting form. In this case, I'm just going to walk you through the pages that you'll need to use. As you can see, there are a lot of worksheets. But don't worry, you only have to fill in information in 3 of the worksheets and it's pretty brief. I've filled in a little bit of information in advance just to make things go faster. In this example, I'm choosing a generic English course. So let's say that we're trying to fill in communication skills. So we give it a subject number. We also give it a title, the credit hours, academic year, all of the information that we would normally give. For the department, we can use a drop-down menu. In this case, I'll just assume that it's from the English department, but really any department could have a course in the communications core. Speaking of the core learning outcome, we'll go ahead and pick the drop-down menu, and in this example, I'll choose Communication O for oral skills. By the way, if you're ever unsure of what the drop-down menu stands for, the very last page here has a drop-down key, so we can see what stands for each department, year, or core learning outcome. The first page, as you can see, is the assessment plan. So we would fill in the information about the coordinator and the team, but let's get right into the plan. First, you'll want to give the name of your assessment. In my example, I'm choosing one assessment that will fulfill the entire core rubric. So in this case, if I want students to demonstrate all the skills used in oral presentations, I'll call this persuasive speech. Let's say that we're going to have the students give a persuasive speech and they're going to have to, let's give a description, devise and deliver an original persuasive speech that's measured by a 5-scale rubric. Mapping core learning outcome components. This simply means that we have to mention which core learning outcome rubric components or performance skills are met by this assignment. Let's take a quick peek. Here's the communication skills rubric, and as you can see, there are 4 specific skills, 4 areas that the students have to demonstrate. So whether they're evaluating effectiveness of various forms of communication, or if they're able to communicate with clarity, I have to make sure that the assessments I use meet those 4 standards. So let's go back. In this description, I've mentioned each of the 4 things that the students have to demonstrate. They can show all of that in just this one persuasive speech. That's why I only need one assignment. Now the scoring scale. Max, what's the highest score that the students could get? In this case, we're scoring with a rubric, so the highest scale on the rubric is 5. The minimum score they could possibly get is 0. And between those two, which score would be considered proficient? Well, let's say that they have to get at least a 3. Now, the student target. What is the percentage that we would want a student to get if they are to be counted proficient? As you can see, the document will fill that in for us. So if 3 is proficient, then they have to get 60% right. Now, for the course target, I've chosen 75% as an example. We'd like maybe 75% of the students to gain that proficient score. You might go higher at 80, you might go a little lower at 70. This is just an example. And now the implementation plan. The implementation plan simply tells when you're going to deliver this assessment, what will happen with the results, when you're going to report those results, and very importantly, when you're going to use those results for improvement. So in my implementation plan, just as an example, the assignment is going to occur sometime in the weeks after the midterm. The oral presentation is going to be graded by a rubric, as I said, And of course, we're going to analyze those results and report them to the department chair and also share them with all faculty that are teaching each section of the course at the end of the semester. The department chair would share that information in the operational plan and assessment report, which we call the OPAR. And of course, we mentioned that any improvements will be implemented in the following semester. They might even be reflected in the next course syllabi. Moving on then, let's see what happens with assessment data. Here's where we put in the raw scores. As you can see, some information has already been filled in just from the first screen. Now, I'm just going to use this as an example. Let's say that I put in multiple sections of this course. Let's say we have three sections of the same course. Now, how many are enrolled? Well, the enrollment cap is at 25. So let's say that we start out with an enrollment of that number. But as time goes on, how many complete the course? How many students stay with you to the end? In this case, some students may have withdrawn. So let's say in the first course, maybe you ended up with 20. And in the second section, they ended up with 19. Oh, and they had quite a few to drop in the third course, 17. Now, for the first assessment, and in my case I only have one assessment, just the persuasive speech, how many students were actually assessed? Well, I started with 25 enrolled, but I ended up with only 20. So let's say as an example that all 20 of the students who stayed with me the full time were assessed. And ideally that would be the case for each course. Out of those students who took them, what number was proficient? So let's find out. Let's say as an example, out of the 20 students that took this or gave this persuasive speech, 17 were proficient. And in the second class, maybe 14. And oh, it really dropped in the third class, maybe 13, just as an example. If we had more than one assessment, I'd go ahead and put in the raw numbers for assessment number 2 and assessment number 3. For core assessment, we really only need a snapshot of student learning. We don't need a lot of assessments, and so really 3 should be the maximum, but 1 is probably sufficient. Now we've got the raw numbers in, so let's move on to the assessment summary. And as you can see, the Excel document has already filled in a lot of this information. We can see the percentages that were proficient in each of the courses. We also see what the total enrollment was, counting all the sections, and what percentage of students were able to complete it. And here's our overall proficiency rate. Now we'll move forward to a pivot table. In this case, this is just here for additional information if you decide to use it. You won't need to use the pivot table. This is the last page, the SLO matrix, that you would have to fill out. As you can see, a lot of it would already be filled out for you. The first 3 columns are already filled out automatically by the Excel document. That's very helpful. And so once again, we see how many were enrolled, how many completed it and were assessed, and how many were proficient. Now, because the target was to have at least 75% of students show proficiency, in this example, the target was met. So that's great news. Now we move to the use of results. The use of results simply means that we're making suggestions based on the data to improve student learning. So just in this hypothetical example, I typed in a couple of answers. In this hypothetical example, I said that most students were successful, 78% of them were successful in fact, in their persuasive speech. So the strategy of sharing videotaped examples of proficient speeches will continue. The students who did have difficulty often struggled to support their thesis statements with evidence. So as an example of something that can improve that, Future instruction can focus more on using evidence-based statements. The last column, did it work, is where you would put any reflections, anything that we learned by trying to implement those strategies that we suggested. If this is the first time that you've suggested these strategies, then you wouldn't have had time to actually implement them yet. That wouldn't happen until the next semester. So this last column can be left blank. In this case, I simply put the answer that this is the first semester that the strategy was suggested, so it hasn't been implemented yet. As I mentioned before, the first three columns are automatically filled in for you, so it shows which core learning outcome is met and what the assessment is that you're using to meet it, in this case, a persuasive speech. Now your document is done. You would save it and turn it in to your department chair. To see the other worksheets, this is just informational. Here you see the core course assessment rubric, so you'll know that you're meeting the criteria for effective course assessment. The column that is highlighted shows mastery, and that's what we're going for. When we say mastery, we mean mastery in terms of how well you structured your assessment plan and how well you reported it in this form. So, certainly we want to make sure that we're meeting all the guidelines of the rubric, the core learning outcome rubric that is, that it's meeting all the skills that the students are supposed to demonstrate, that it's consistent with comparable core courses, that you have a plan that is fully outlined. Hopefully all of your students, or nearly all of the students in sections, were taught and assessed. You provided all the relevant information that the document asked for, and you have very clear responses. So that gives you the information upon which we would judge how well this form was filled out. If you're not sure how to fill out the form, the Instructions tab gives you the information for how to fill out each area. It tells you what each worksheet is looking for. Again, you only really have to fill out information for 3 of them. And that, of course, is the assessment plan, the assessment data, and also the SLO matrix. And finally, the drop-down key, which you've already seen. The most important part is the SLO matrix, because this is where we see how the data is used to come up with results and recommendations for improvement. Thank you.